China is ready for war. That was the message that Beijing sent to the entire world this week, as thousands upon thousands of Chinese troops staged one of the most elaborate military parades that the world has seen in the last half-century. Celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, China's grand spectacle was meant to send a series of critical messages around the globe. To the people of the Middle Kingdom, take pride, for your nation is strong and powerful. To China's allies on the global stage, welcome. Your loyalty to China will be rewarded. And to the global West, pay attention, because China is the new superpower in town. Facing tens of thousands of his people in Tiananmen Square, Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke with clarity. Today, mankind is faced with a choice of peace or war, dialogue or confrontation, win-win or zero-sum. Now, most of the world has been consumed by the geopolitical implications of the parade, China standing united with its allies, while America and Europe watch from halfway around the world. But the event was about far more than strategic messaging. It was about military might, and there is no better way to announce military might than by revealing lots and lots and lots of secret weapons. Some of them were known by rumor in the Western world, but seen only rarely, if they'd been seen at all. Others are weapons that China has boasted about for years, but shown in operation for the very first time. Still others were entirely new, unknown to China's adversaries, besides whatever data might exist in the guarded vaults of military intelligence. And if these weapons really do perform in the way that China claims, then its global adversaries really should be concerned about just how powerful the world's new superpower could be. What they revealed. Okay, so before we dive into the military technology on display in Beijing, let's just acknowledge a few things up front. With a few exceptions that we will mention, most of the new tech that China showed off during its military parade was not shown in action. None of the new kit was shown either firing weapons or fulfilling other core functions that it would have to in a time of war. As a result, the performance of the unveiled weapons we're talking about is still a mystery in most cases. Some of it might not be ready to go operational, and for all we know, some of it might just simply be vaporware, made-up weapons that are just as much of a fabrication as, say, the bipedal combat mech suit that Russia unveiled in 2018 on the T-14 Armata tank that Russia totally, definitely, oh so really is going to build. And it's also worth remembering that despite the grand spectacle of China's military parade, the training required to look good while doing a goose step is oh so very different than the training required to, fight and win in a war. China, you see, could unveil the literal Death Star during this event, and it still wouldn't change the fact that China's military and its hardware are completely untested in modern war. But even with those caveats, military innovation matters, and even a conservative assessment of what China just unveiled has made it clear. Other than the United States, there is no other world power with a military-industrial complex that can rival China. There used to be, but there ain't anymore. We'll start off with the missiles, and perhaps most important among them, the Dongfeng 5. The weapon, known as DF-5 for short, is an intercontinental ballistic missile that's been in service since the 1980s. But during the parade, China unveiled the newest version, the DF-5C, for the very first time. According to China, the DF-5C is capable of hitting anywhere in the United States using a more powerful set of engines and operating at a longer range than any of its predecessors. And not only that, but every DF-5C can carry not one, not two, but 12 nuclear warheads. These are held in a style known as MIRVs, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. Basically, while in its flight, a missile of this kind will intentionally splinter and release a bunch of smaller sub-missiles, each raining down onto their targets independently and making interception an exponentially more difficult task. The DF-5C is meant to be launched from underground missile silos with a range that the Associated Press estimates at 12,400 miles or 20,000 kilometers. Nor was the DF-5C the only new ICBM that China unveiled. The nation also showed off its secretive DF-61 missile for the very first time, a mobile truck-launched missile with a range estimated around 7,500 miles or 12,000 kilometers. That places US cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix, and Seattle all well within its range, targetable by missiles that could be moved all around China until nearly the moment of launch, making them far more difficult to take out with a preemptive strike. During the parade, China also showed off its air-launched long-range nuclear missile, the JL-1, and the submarine-launched ICBM, the JL-3, meaning that when taken together, the missile technology China put on display represents another fearsome capability, a full nuclear triad, now with the stated ability to hit any target across the globe. And then There were the lasers, listed by China as the LY-1 and shown during the parade while mounted atop a row of armored trucks. According to Chinese official sources, the LY-1 is intended for naval use, an exceptionally powerful laser that will intercept drones and missiles. It will accomplish that task by essentially blinding their optical sensors, making them far less effective and likely to become useless if they're reliant on optical sensing to identify and hit their targets. Aboard a ship, the LY-1 would be likely to harness extreme raw power, with ships more than capable of carrying a specialized power generator on board to fuel the laser's energy consumption needs. It could also be turned against human operators, blinding pilots in adversary aircraft, shooting at adversary ground troops while mounted on a truck, or potentially even being pointed at enemy vessels. The weapon mirrors American and European systems currently in testing, although it's unknown whether China's LY-1 is ahead of those systems in development, falling behind, or running basically even alongside them. Also in the realm of futuristic technology, China showed off what it described as robotic wolves, four-legged robots with antennas and some sort of imaging equipment to self-navigate. Similar to the technology in development by other nations, these robots are likely to be used in reconnaissance or mine-sweeping missions and may even be used to track enemy troops, although, again, their level of technological maturity is an open question. This is a Black Mirror shit. Joining the robot wolves in China's ground forces were a couple of newly unveiled army units, a large cyberspace unit that will engage in digital warfare, and an information support force that was established a bit over a year ago. Beijing showed off new microwave weapons and a new so-called missile gun, carrying up to 96 interceptors to shoot down adversary drone swarms. And while China was scarce on details, it displayed the existence of the truck-mounted HQ-29, a space defense system that's supposedly able to shoot down the satellites of foreign adversaries while they're in orbit. For ground combat operations, they showed off a series of light combat vehicles that could be airdropped into active combat zones alongside paratroopers, indicating a potential willingness to engage in parachute drop operations. And finally, China unveiled the Type 100 main battle tank and the Type 100 infantry fighting vehicle, a new designation based on a common tank chassis described by China as a fourth-generation system. The Type 100 is believed to use an auto-loading unmanned turret and would likely be equipped with onboard drone-killing technology and possibly even a couple of robot wolves to go along with it, because why not? Then there was the naval side of things, where despite the fact that the CCP hasn't yet figured out a way to sail its aircraft carriers into the city streets of Beijing, brand new naval equipment was still on display. One of the most impressive weapons to be shown off was the AJX-002, a 65-foot or 18-meter-long unmanned underwater vehicle, or UUV. It's built to be stealthy and evade detection from typical anti-submarine warfare vessels and their onboard equipment. For an unmanned submarine, the AJX-002 is impressively sized, and it shows that China has been watching lessons learned from other conflicts like Ukraine just as keenly as the rest of the world. An unmanned submarine like this could be tremendously useful in performing reconnaissance without putting human operators at risk, or it could be loaded up with a staggering amount of explosives and detonated against the underwater hull of an adversary vessel. Meanwhile, on the surface, China revealed a new unmanned vessel towed on a truck bed, albeit without much of an indicator on what it would be actually used for. Just as important, if not more so, was a sequence of anti-ship missiles known as the YJ series. Several missile types from the YJ line are intended to be hypersonic, and according to China's state media, they are all-weather capable, making them entirely able to be deployed in rough conditions against ocean-going targets. The YJ series of missiles are especially concerning to the United States because they're intended to be able to destroy American aircraft carriers, dodging incoming interceptors at over 5 times the speed of sound before detonating in the right spot to send a carrier and its whole air complement below the waves. That makes the missile series a particular problem for a hypothetical defense of Taiwan, where Washington and Taipei alike have been operating on the assumption that American carriers would be the deciding factor on whether or not Taiwan could withstand a Chinese invasion. Most prominent among the missiles was the YJ-19, which seemed to be outfitted with a scramjet propulsion system that could make it even more difficult for the United States to deal with. Finally, there was air power, where China made some of the most impressive revelations of the entire military parade. Some of China's aerial assets were stuck on the ground, including a procession of unmanned fixed-wing and helicopter drones that were displayed on heavy trucks. Of those drones, some are more familiar than others. One of them was a precision strike drone similar to the American MQ-9 Reaper, while another is likely a high-altitude reconnaissance drone that may have some level of strike capability. Two of them, however, appeared to be intended as unmanned combat aircraft, otherwise known as loyal wingmen, built to fly alongside manned aircraft or even operate autonomously in a dynamic combat environment. Those drones were roughly the size of China's manned J-10C fighter jet, suggesting that they likely come with relatively heavy weapons loads as well as the fuel capacity to afford them a highly impressive range. Although they weren't observed in flight, China is known to have recently flown multiple other aircraft that are believed to be loyal wingmen designs, suggesting that Beijing's ability to fly this sort of aircraft is coming together rather rapidly. Then there were the manned aircraft, where the most impressive debut, by a wide margin, was a fifth-generation aircraft known as the Shenyang J-35. Flying behind several copies of China's more established J-20, the J-35 is similar in design and profile to the American F-35 and is expected to operate off China's upcoming line of aircraft carriers. It didn't do anything aerobatically impressive during the show, other than successfully flying the path it was meant to, but its public unveiling was still a major testament to China's ability to build highly sophisticated stealth aircraft. Careful onlookers spotted 4 other new aircraft, including the 2-seater variant of the stealthy J-20, known as the J-20S, where a co-pilot will be capable of directing drone swarms, operating as a real-time coordinator of battlefield intelligence, and more. It's really cool. It's really cool. There was also the J-15DT, a new version of the J-15 fighter that China uses on its aircraft carriers. The DT program is an electronic warfare version of the jet, meant to operate off the new catapult launch carriers that China is building instead of the ski jump carriers already in service. There was the Y-20 strategic airlifter, not new by itself, but made new because of the advanced engines that it's now been equipped with. Finally, there was the KJ-600, a twin-propeller folding-wing aircraft meant to operate off aircraft carriers equipped with an early warning and control system similar to the US Navy's E-2 Hawkeye. Again, it's worth remembering that most of these pieces of equipment weren't shown in action, and those that were only shown making their way through a carefully manicured, immaculately staged parade ground. From this display alone, we cannot confirm anything about the actual combatability of any of these weapons or systems, all of which remain unproven under the rigors of war. But regardless, the display of this much advanced equipment all at once shows that China's military-industrial complex is operating at a level far beyond nearly any other nation on Earth. If 50% of the weapon systems we've described were to be completely made up of vaporware, then the remaining 50% would still be enough to place China in the topmost tier of military innovators in the 21st century. And even despite the scale and scope of what China unveiled, it is worth emphasizing that there's still a hell of a lot that we haven't seen. What they didn't. Now, although China did reveal a staggering range of new weapon systems during its parade, it's worth taking a moment to run through some of the technology that China didn't unveil that's believed to be in active development. In some cases, China may not have wanted to unveil concepts that might not be trusted quite yet to perform flyovers or to amble through the parade grounds without breaking down, like Russia's T-14 tank did at another parade back in 2015. Other technology might simply be meant to remain secret either until it reaches a point of maturity or until it's revealed in the heat of active combat. Most prominent on the list of missing items was sea power. Other than unmanned surface and submarine drones and the anti-ship cruise missiles that China showed off, naval power was all but absent from China's display, despite Beijing's extensive focus on that sort of technology. Of course, it would have been very difficult to get, let's say, a naval destroyer into Tiananmen Square, but China could have shown naval capabilities by video and chose not to. Those include China's newest aircraft carrier, the Fujian, currently undergoing sea trials. China also could have shown off the Fujian's catapult launch capability, including by launching the stealthy and newly unveiled J-35, which reportedly underwent catapult trials in May of this year. Alternately, China could have shown off its anticipated Type 004 aircraft carrier while it's being built in dry dock. Construction for the Type 004 began last year, and once it's ready, the craft will be China's first nuclear-propelled aircraft carrier. China could also have shown off a new line of specialized landing barges, which made headlines earlier this year when they laid down a line of bridges from the deep ocean onto Chinese shores. Other types of Chinese manned surface vessel have been spotted and their images circulated online, while over 20 unmanned surface and underwater vehicles have been officially confirmed by the Chinese government. Just as surprising, however, was the air power that China chose not to show off. According to some military aviation experts, the most likely appearance was the H-20, China's first strategic stealth bomber, and the first stealth bomber produced by any nation other than the United States. The Chinese Air Force has been advertising that the H-20 was soon to be unveiled since early in 2024, and early this year, still images circulated that are believed to depict the H-20 performing high-altitude testing. More so than any of the kits that China did unveil, a low-altitude flyover by the H-20 would have set the defense world on fire, so it's not entirely clear why China chose not to unveil it. There's also the J-36, a mysterious tailless three-jet aircraft that was spotted over the city of Chengdu in early 2025, making multiple test flights over publicly visible flight routes and allowing Chinese sources to capture all sorts of high-quality imagery. The J-36 is a purportedly sixth-generation aircraft, a generation ahead of both the J-20 and J-35 in Chinese service, and the F-22 and F-35 in American service. In both cases, China may have avoided a flyover because of the potential for Western intelligence to get a close look at the aircraft, if they haven't done so already. But it's worth emphasizing that by unveiling the H-20, and especially what would be the world's first publicly revealed sixth-generation fighter in the J-36, China could have made a far more overt claim about its ability to rival or eclipse the United States. The fact that China skipped that opportunity is interesting all by itself. A grand pronouncement. So, with all this new military equipment unveiled, but a fair proportion of China's suspected technology kept aside for a later date, it's time to ask the much larger question. What signal was China trying to send to the world by revealing all this hardware at once? Now, part of the answer is pretty straightforward. You show off a bunch of purportedly powerful advanced weapons to scare your enemies and embolden your allies, to put hope in the hearts of your own citizenry while seeding fear into the minds of foreign observers who would see you brought down. But that's all the superficial stuff, and it's by pushing a bit deeper into the details that we can come to a set of more interesting revelations. In one sense, the fact that channels like this one and defense experts across the world are so focused on new Chinese technologies is almost certainly by design. Military parades are not a sign of military readiness, and if given nothing else to talk about, the Western press could very easily have spent its time downplaying the relevance of Xi's grand authoritarian display. Instead, China has provided the world with something to take seriously, a booming military-industrial complex that is producing hardware of note. The message is just as important, or even more so, for Beijing's international partners. Although some of China's technology, like its most advanced jets, its aircraft carriers, and its ICBMs, will be for China's sole use, a lot of its new technology could be on offer to other nations, and it sends an even broader message that's even more important. If China is able to research and develop this many concepts in this many directions, then that would speak immensely positively of China's ability to produce more run-of-the-mill equipment, naval frigates and corvettes, tested fourth-generation fighters like the J-10C, or main battle tanks that are already in service. Like the US, Russia, France, Turkey, South Korea, and other militarily powerful nations, China badly wants to be a major exporter of weapons, not just because of the financial benefits, but because of the long-term geopolitical connections that come with being a global arms dealer. More than just a showcase of the new stuff, China's military parade was likely an attempt to convince its partners that Beijing's arms industry can handle as many bulk orders as they'd like to place. Also, as it relates to Beijing's allies, it's hard to discount the comparison between China and its foremost global rival, the United States. On one hand, there's the obvious parallel in military parades run by each country this year. China's was a massive, grandiose affair with lots of new technology, while America's ill-fated parade attempt was a bit unimpressive to look at. But much more important was the fact that China chose to stage this military parade while Xi Jinping stood flanked by a range of important world leaders. Putin from Russia, Kim from North Korea, Pezeshkian from Iran, Sharif from Pakistan, Subianto from Indonesia, and even a couple of European leaders, Alexander Vučić of Serbia and Robert Fico from Slovakia. The United States stands alongside the nations of NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and its other allies, but China stands alongside a global coalition of its own, all of whom tacitly acknowledge the superiority of China's military might. Insofar as the new technology itself, China's selection of hardware reflected a turn away from the grandiose, self-stroking choices of a bumbling autocracy and toward a new desire to field practical equipment for practical use. There's no substitute for real-world experience, and modern China has no more experience in war today than it did yesterday. But it does have a range of new toys that imply its desire to be competitive in a modern battle space. China's decision to show off a range of new aerial and naval drones, plus several different kinds of counter-drone technology, is a decision that makes clear the fact that China's watching global warfare and trying to innovate fast enough that it can keep up with the times. China could be building bigger and bigger ICBMs if it wanted to put on a show. Instead, it's developed multiple re-entry missiles to make itself effective. It could have shown off its aircraft carriers. Instead, it showed off the missiles that will sink its adversaries' aircraft carriers. It could have done a flyover with hundreds of fighter jets, but instead it rolled a procession of unmanned drones that, once they go operational, will be more formidable than most fighter jets could ever be. And if China intended to use its H-20 stealth bomber or its 6th generation J-36 purely to deter any nation from challenging it, then it could have started building that deterrence by showing them off over Beijing. Instead, it kept its most advanced technology in reserve, despite the fact that those aircraft are flight-ready, possibly because they aren't yet war-ready. If one thing is clear, it's that China's grand parade across Beijing is more than just an attempt to inflate the ego of Xi Jinping. The spectacle, grandiose as it may have been, was meant to send a message. Beijing is ready for war, and it intends to become nothing less than a superpower on the world stage. At this point, with what China has put on display and the capabilities it's expected to field by the end of this decade, it's an open question whether China has already reached superpower status. The answer to that question, however, is up to you. At least, it's up to you for now. Thank you for watching.